You know, sometimes the most incredible, most dramatic stories, they aren't the ones you find in the big history books. Nope. They're hidden right in plain sight, tucked away in old census records, dusty marriage licenses, and forgotten newspaper clippings. So today, we're going to piece together one of those exact kinds of stories, the tragic and deeply human history of the Steinman family from Albany, Missouri.
And it all starts, or maybe it's better to say it all ends, with this shocking line from a local newspaper back in 1917. This is how the death of Arthur Steinman, a young husband and a new father, was reported to the world. I mean, it's just so abrupt, so violent, and it leaves so much unsaid. And you can see that uncertainty right away in the press coverage at the time. Look at this. One local paper, the Albany Capital, uses the phrase supposed suicide, which, leaves a little room for doubt. But then you go just one town over, and the Canesville News is way more direct, kills himself. This confusion in the immediate aftermath, well, it just makes the mystery that much deeper.
So that's the big question, right? The one that just hangs over this entire story. But to even begin to understand what happened on that one tragic night, we have to understand the family that lived through it. We've got to go back to the beginning. So let's start at the beginning with the family's foundation, the parents, Samuel and Mary Harriet Steinman. They're the ones who built a life for themselves in Albany, Missouri, way back in the late 1800s. Samuel was a butcher, a solid tradesman who, and this is a big deal for the time, owned his home free and clear of a mortgage. I mean, that's a real symbol of stability. His wife, Hattie, she came from a prominent local family, the Hewletts, and by all accounts, their home was a hub of community life. Newspapers from the time described this huge surprise birthday party for Hattie, with friends and family coming from all over, so their house was a place of celebration. But, and this is key, it was also the place the family gathered when things went wrong. That detail, well, it becomes tragically important later on. Now, Samuel and Hattie raised 5 children, and each of them went on to live a very, very different life. Yeah, take a look at this. It really lays out the whole generation at a glance. Right off the bat, there's the heartbreak of their firstborn, Lauren, who died when he was just a baby. Then you've got Ralph, the ambitious one. He moves to Oklahoma and works his way all the way up to superintendent of the city water department. Lily was a career woman, a school teacher who traveled for work and never married, which is pretty independent for her time. Then there's Edmund, whose life, let's just say, was complicated. And finally, we have Arthur, the youngest, the one described in the local paper as a genial young man liked by all. Before the family had to face its final tragedies, it was tested, again and again, by a whole series of devastating hardships. This was a family that really knew what it meant to endure. So, the first big test hits the family in 1901. A smallpox epidemic comes sweeping through the area. According to the local paper, the Steinman family actually refused to be vaccinated, and that was a decision that had immediate and pretty serious consequences. Their daughter, Lily, just a teenager at the time, caught the disease from a neighbor. The entire family was put under a strict quarantine, totally isolated from the rest of their community. All right, fast forward 5 years to 1906, and disaster strikes the family again. This time, it's Ralph, the oldest son. He was driving a wagon when his team of horses got spooked. They just bolted, and Ralph was thrown from the wagon straight into a barbed wire fence. The paper just says he was seriously injured. You can just imagine the sheer violence of an accident like that. And then we jump ahead to 1921. And this incident, this one was maybe the most harrowing of all, especially for the patriarch, Samuel. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some minor injury. Samuel was working on a Ford engine, really early automotive tech, when it kicked back and broke his arm. Remember, this is before antibiotics. Something like this, it was basically a death sentence. The wound developed severe blood poisoning, and to save his life, doctors had no choice but to amputate his hand. This accident nearly killed him, and it just goes to show the incredible resilience this family had. Most of these hardships were things the family dealt with privately. But one son's troubles, well, they spilled out into the open and became a full-blown town scandal. This is Edmund, the second son. In 1923, his life just completely unraveled, right out in public. He abandoned his wife, Cora, and their 4 kids. He was arrested, brought back, and, according to one newspaper report, the officers called him the most troublesome prisoner they have attempted to bring to justice. He was eventually ordered to pay child support, but really the damage to his reputation was already done.
And this quote, wow, it just perfectly captures how his private life became public gossip. This is from the Albany Ledger, and it says it all. The town wasn't surprised. His domestic difficulties were clearly an open secret, and his downfall was there in print for all of his neighbors to read about. Okay, so now let's go back to that awful night in 1917. But this time we have all this new context, right? We have a family defined by stability, but also shaped by these repeated brutal hardships and even public shame. Arthur's death happened at his father's home, that family center we talked about. The official reports noted that his wife had powder burns on her hand, and just tragically, their baby had them on its face. But the family, they offered a different explanation. They told the paper they believed Arthur had never fully recovered from a very serious car accident a couple of years earlier. For them, this wasn't some sudden, shocking act. It was the tragic end of a long, unseen injury. So when you put all these little fragments together, the accidents, the illnesses, the scandals, the tragedies, suddenly, you're not just looking at a family tree anymore. You're seeing a real human story. And that, right there, is the real magic of doing this kind of research. The dry data from a census record that just lists Samuel as a butcher suddenly comes to life when a newspaper article describes him nearly dying from a broken arm. Arthur isn't just a name with a death date. He's that genial young man whose family believed he was suffering long before that final fatal night. All these little fragments, they snap together like puzzle pieces to tell the story of real people just trying to get through some extraordinary times. The story of the Steinmans is such a powerful reminder that history isn't just about famous names and epic events. It's written in the margins of local newspapers and in the columns of public records. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What triumphs, tragedies, and secrets are just waiting to be discovered in your own family's past.